Living in Maplewood residences wasn't my initial preference, but its proximity to my workplace and the network of walking trails made it an ideal spot for me and my service dog, Baxter. Baxter, a magnificent golden retriever, assists me in managing my PTSD episodes stemming from my military service overseas. He's impeccably trained, always dons his service vest in public, and responds to commands flawlessly. I'm well versed in the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, a necessity when one depends on a service animal. However, I never anticipated having to invoke federal law in discussions with the president of our homeowners association, HOA. The first time I encountered Linda Cartwright, she was clutching a clipboard, her face set in a permanent scowl. Introducing herself as the HOA president, her tone implied I should be impressed. "I don't recall approving a dog in this community," she remarked, eyes narrowing as she glanced down at Baxter, who sat obediently by my side. Politely, I explained that Baxter was a service dog, not a pet, and thus exempt from pet restrictions under federal law. She huffed, muttered something about people exploiting loopholes, and walked away. In hindsight, that was a clear warning sign. In the ensuing weeks, I received 3 separate notices citing alleged violations. My grass being an inch too tall, my mailbox being the incorrect shade of black, and my garbage can being visible from the street for approximately 45 minutes after collection. Each notice bore Linda's elaborate signature, complete with a smiley face that felt more menacing than friendly. Wanting to avoid conflict, I complied with each directive, but I sensed these petty infractions were just the beginning. Then came the HOA meeting where Linda proposed a new rule requiring all animals, including service animals, to be registered with the board and to wear HOA-approved identification. When I raised my hand to point out that this conflicted with the ADA, she cut me off, asserting that federal laws don't override community standards. Several neighbors appeared uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. After the meeting, Linda approached me and whispered, "If you want to be difficult, I can be difficult too." Her breath reeked of coffee and intimidation. The following weekend, I was enjoying a peaceful morning on my front porch with Baxter resting at my feet, reading the newspaper, when a shadow fell across my lawn. Linda stood there in her signature khaki shorts and polo shirt, holding a spray bottle. "Your dog is violating the new pet ordinance by not having proper HOA identification," she announced loudly enough for my neighbors to hear. Calmly, I reminded her that Baxter was a service dog protected by federal law and that the HOA couldn't legally require special identification. Moreover, I added, the rule hadn't even been officially implemented yet. Her face turned an alarming shade of red. "I'm tired of you military types thinking you're above the rules," she spat out, stepping onto my yard. "If you won't comply, I'll handle this myself." Before I could react, she aimed her spray bottle at Baxter and sprayed him directly in the face with some kind of liquid. Baxter yelped and backed away, pawing at his eyes. I immediately stepped between them and demanded to know what was in the bottle. "Just a little vinegar and water solution," Linda said with a smirk. "It won't hurt him, but maybe now he'll learn to respect authority." I was absolutely livid, but years of military training had taught me to remain calm under pressure. I took Baxter inside, rinsed his eyes thoroughly, and ensured he was okay. The vinegar solution had irritated his eyes, but thankfully there was no lasting damage. Once I was certain Baxter was comfortable, I called the police. 911, "What's your emergency?" the dispatcher asked. I reported the assault on my service dog, emphasizing that interfering with a service animal is a federal offense. The dispatcher took my information and assured me officers would be dispatched immediately. 20 minutes later, 2 police officers arrived at my door. I explained the situation, presented Baxter's service animal certification and training documentation, and pointed out Linda's house across the street. One officer stayed to take my detailed statement, while the other went to speak with Linda. From my window, I could see her gesturing wildly, her face contorted with indignation. The officer seemed unimpressed by her theatrics. When both officers returned, they informed me that Linda had admitted to spraying Baxter, but claimed she was enforcing community standards. They explained that they had informed her that interfering with a service animal is indeed a federal offense under the ADA, punishable by significant fines and potential jail time. Moreover, her actions constituted animal cruelty under state law. They were placing her under arrest and asked if I would be willing to press charges. Without hesitation, I said yes. Linda was escorted to the police car in handcuffs, screaming about how she would have me evicted and how the entire neighborhood would turn against me. Several neighbors had come outside to witness the commotion, and I heard one of them whisper, "She's finally gone too far." Another neighbor approached me afterward and apologized for not speaking up at the meeting. "We've all been intimidated by her for too long," she admitted, glancing at Baxter, who had recovered from his ordeal and was back to his calm, attentive self. The legal process moved surprisingly quickly. Linda was charged with interference with a service animal, animal cruelty, and harassment. Her initial court appearance was a spectacle. She arrived in designer clothes with an expensive lawyer who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted against her. The judge was particularly stern when reviewing the case, noting that community rules never supersede federal law, especially when it comes to disability accommodations. While awaiting trial, an emergency HOA meeting was called. I attended with Baxter, and to my surprise, nearly every homeowner in the community showed up. The vice president of the board called for a vote of no confidence in Linda's leadership, citing her reckless actions that had exposed our community to legal liability. The vote was unanimous. Linda was removed from the board effective immediately. Someone had even printed new name tags for the board members' table, and Linda's was conspicuously absent. The criminal case concluded with Linda pleading guilty to a reduced charge in exchange for avoiding a longer jail sentence. The judge sentenced her to 30 days in county jail, a $5,000 fine, 200 hours of community service at an animal shelter, and mandatory education classes on disability rights. As the sentence was read, Linda's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally a dawning realization of the consequences of her actions. "But I was just enforcing the rules," she protested weakly as the bailiff approached. The judge leaned forward and replied, "The most important rule, Miss Cartwright, is to respect the law of the land, which protects service animals and the people who depend on them." As Linda was led away to begin her jail term, our eyes met briefly across the courtroom. The entitlement and superiority that had once defined her expression were gone, replaced by the humbled look of someone who had finally encountered a rule she couldn't bend or break. She mouthed something that might have been, "This isn't over," but we both knew it was. Baxter sat beside me, perfectly poised and attentive, the very image of the professional service dog he was. I reached down to scratch behind his ears, and he leaned into my hand, a small gesture of partnership that had weathered an unexpected storm and emerged stronger on the other side. In the weeks that followed, life in Maplewood residences slowly returned to a sense of peace I hadn't known since moving in. Without Linda's looming presence, the HOA meetings took on a completely different tone, one marked by openness, collaboration, and, for the first time, actual concern for the residents instead of rigid enforcement of arbitrary rules. It was clear to everyone that her ousting had triggered a long-overdue shift in the community culture. Neighbors who once kept their heads down started waving hello, striking up conversations during morning walks, and showing genuine curiosity about Baxter and me. One morning, as I strolled through the trail behind our homes with Baxter trotting beside me, a man in his 70s with a weather cap approached. He introduced himself as Gerald, a retired postal worker who had lived in the neighborhood since its early days. "Saw you stand up to her," he said, offering a firm handshake. "Good on you. That woman's been terrorizing people for years." Most of us were too afraid to push back. I thanked him and told him I hadn't wanted to be a crusader, just to live in peace. Gerald nodded knowingly. Sometimes peace needs a little noise to protect it. Later that week, a handwritten card was left in my mailbox. Inside was a short note. "Thank you for protecting more than just your dog. You gave us all a little courage." It wasn't signed. I didn't need to know who had written it. The sentiment was enough. Baxter, for his part, seemed unaffected by all the drama. His calm demeanor and steady loyalty never wavered. I had taken him in for a thorough veterinary checkup after the incident, and the vet confirmed he was in perfect health. Still, I noticed he was slightly more alert whenever someone approached the porch. It was subtle, but real, proof that even the best trained animals remember harm. As Linda served her sentence, word about the case spread beyond our neighborhood. A local journalist wrote an editorial piece titled, "When HOA Rules Cross the Line," highlighting the danger of unchecked authority in suburban communities. The article sparked dozens of letters to the editor from people across the state, sharing similar stories of overreach. Some praised the system for holding Linda accountable. Others warned how rare such accountability really was. Either way, a conversation had begun. I was later contacted by an advocacy group for veterans with service animals. They had heard about the case and asked if I'd be willing to speak at a seminar they were hosting. At first, I hesitated. Public speaking wasn't something I had ever been drawn to. But the thought of helping even one other veteran avoid what Baxter and I went through made the decision easier. The seminar was held in a modest auditorium filled with veterans, trainers, and legal advocates. I told my story plainly, not for sympathy, but to lay out how quickly ignorance can turn into cruelty when power is unchecked. After I spoke, a young man with a prosthetic leg approached me with tears in his eyes. His service dog had been denied access to his apartment building, and he had been too embarrassed to fight back. "You made me feel like I'm not invisible," he said. Baxter sat loyally by my side through it all, just as he had from the beginning. Back in Maplewood, the HOA drafted a new set of policies in response to the incident. With the help of a legal consultant, they created a clear section affirming the rights of disabled residents and their service animals. No vague language, no loopholes, and certainly no room for future Karens to reinterpret the law for their own agenda. They also established an anonymous feedback system so residents could report harassment or abuse without fear of retaliation. I was asked to review the draft and offer suggestions. For once, it felt like my voice mattered. As for Linda, I heard that after serving her 30 days in jail, she tried to sell her house. But word had spread, and buyers were wary. Her reputation followed her like a shadow, harder to erase than any stain on her lawn. Eventually, she moved out under the cover of early morning, a moving truck parked discreetly on the curb. There were no goodbyes, no farewells, just silence. Months passed. Seasons changed. Maplewood blossomed into the quiet, respectful neighborhood I had hoped for when I first signed the lease. Baxter and I resumed our routines: morning hikes, evening porch time, weekend trips to the park. Occasionally, someone would stop us to ask questions about service animals or to thank us for standing up when it mattered. I never saw it as bravery. It felt more like duty, a word that still carried weight with me. One Sunday morning, as the sun filtered through the trees and Baxter nuzzled into my side while I sipped my coffee, I reflected on how close we had come to letting injustice win through silence. It wasn't just about a spray bottle or an HOA citation. It was about recognizing when a line had been crossed and having the strength to push back. Baxter nudged my hand, and I smiled, rubbing the spot behind his ears he loved most. "Good boy," I said softly, because he had been more than good. He had been my anchor, my partner, my calm in the storm. And together, we had reminded one angry woman, and maybe a few others, that no title, no clipboard, no neighborhood bylaw ever stands above the rights and dignity of those who served. We had found our peace, and this time it was ours to keep.